Hello, everyone. We are here on week 6. So, it was great to see everyone in class last week. For those who missed it, well, you missed a fun class. All right. So, hopefully, you're done with the assignment by now and would have posted it in our Padlet. And let's go to our PowerPoint. So, make sure that you have the PDF file on, it's called Student Slides, on what week 6 content looks like. And I'm going to go through them. So I'm looking down on my computer here to make sure I have them in place. Okay, so there's a couple of instructional methods that we already know. There's a quick review of what you would have known in your other class. We have experienced lectures. We've all gone through that, and discussions as well as case studies. So those are fairly straightforward. The question for you then is what a case incident looks like. So it's something that you would want to make sure you know. And it's the difference between a case incident and a case study. So those things are very effective when you're actually teaching classes that can potentially have traps on it. And the only way you can explain human behavior is to actually have some form of a case wherein you have two types of cases and then be able to kind of compare those two. There's then also a behavior modeling piece, which means if you role play something, then you actually, so role play and behavioral modeling can be merged together. Role play is fairly straightforward. It has some specific activities for each type of character, and then from there, be able to then create a scenario. Behavior modeling is the role play itself, the character that is playing a part is exercising an ideal behavior for the situation that you're trying to teach. So you can combine that. One of the video that we have in this discussion thread for this week actually is an example of that. So kind of giving you a tip on what to answer for that discussion thread. All right, and then there's simulation. We've probably seen this in the past. You simulate a scenario. So the difference between role playing and simulation is that the simulation actually has an actual environment that you're working with, but you control that environment. So normally you run that in a classroom, for example, and each individual within the class, within a group, get to play a role and then have a discussion afterwards. So you simulate an environment based on role play and simulation. So you can combine those two. We've all used games before, so that's fairly easy. Action learning essentially is that if you don't actually do something to experience the content that you want to learn, it would not be as effective as if you're actually doing it. So a lot of the examples that we see on like tasty videos that you have seen on TV, on YouTube, for example, some instructional videos, how to put makeup on or whatever. Those things are more action learning because you want people to actually have an action so that then you can imitate that as a learner and be able to learn that way. Okay, so those are various types of instructional methods. There's a lot more. There's one that's called RISEM model, which is a model that I actually got published. RYSEM, which is the Robin Yap Social Experiment Model. For those who have gone to my organizational behavior class, I teach the class as pure social experiment. So we don't do this lecture piece. We go to meet in a classroom, get the instructions of what we need to do, then go out in the world, essentially anywhere in the campus. Sometimes we're on a bus route, sometimes we're in subways, and then experience how humans behave in their own habitat, and then be able to go back to the class and discuss. So it's very much beyond action learning, beyond simulation, because we're actually out there in the field trying to understand what's going on and why people behave the way they do, and then we have a discussion. I will actually post an example or a couple of examples of digital social experiments that we have done. And you've probably seen this before in other just YouTube videos wherein people like lip sync something, or they have little signs, but there's music playing on behind them. And those are just examples of what people have done, but what we do in class is actually figure out why that is effective or not effective, how many views do we have, what are the comments do we get, and so forth. So we use the medium of videoing and lip syncing the video. Lip syncing the video, that does not make sense. Lip syncing music, and then the video, posting it on YouTube, and then measuring that way. So that's called the social experiment digital format that we then analyze. So anyway, the RISA model is fairly new, and it's something that I am trying to get people to move into, because especially for the humanities type or liberal arts type classes, like organizational behavior, like human resources classes, any of the things that can potentially be very complex because we're trying to understand humans rather than a process. So if you're doing accounting, for example, or a class that is math, they're hard sciences, and there's always a set result and set responses. But for things like, that's why we don't use the word understand, for example, in our learning objectives, because as I said in class, my definition of understanding could be different from yours, and how do we measure that, right? So if we put it in a different modality, which would be a social experiment, and measure how people behave closer to the ideal that we want, then maybe that's actually a different way of measuring success in our training. So it's another evaluation method, which again is a tip for your other discussion thread that you can respond to. Okay, so I'm gonna switch videos and then go to the next slide.